mute. Oh, I think maybe I don't know. We'll figure it out. We always figure it out. So it could be starting to be live soon. I'm not sure. I'll wait till we actually see it. I might have to start editing the videos at the very beginning to make sure, but we'll see. All right. Okay, can you still hear me in our Zoom, Kelly?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
No, I can't. Okay, this is what happened last time. Okay, so this all, oh, I remember. Got it. I just had to close the YouTube thing, but you can hear me now, right?
I can hear you. Can you
and
hear
I
me?
can hear you. Okay, good. All right, so hello everybody, anyone that's watching live or watching the replay. We're here, we're just getting started. We're still figuring out all the logistics. We're on Zoom together, and I'm gonna go in right now to my channel and make sure that we're on there. We are. So anybody joining us, feel free to like type in your comments and your questions, even on the replay, and we'll try to get in there and kind of answer your questions if we can. All right, we're live. It's happening. Hello, Kelly. Welcome.
Hi, Liana. Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
I'm so glad that you're here today. So I've started doing these YouTube videos that are really connecting with other homeschool parents, homeschool influencers, and having real conversations about homeschooling, getting to know people better, trying to provide really wonderful resources for parents, and just creating even more community. So for people that don't know what we've been doing together for the last year or so, I'll just do a quick update on that. So the YouTube channel that I have right now, I had been doing like lifestyle stuff and clean with me's and things like that. But I will probably continue to do that. But right now I'm really focusing on these interviews with homeschoolers, and it's almost a outcropping of our Clubhouse rooms. So we are in that Honey, I'm Homeschooling Club on Clubhouse. And if you don't know what Clubhouse is, that's a really awesome social media community that is audio only. So I'll put links below in the comments here, but it's all about us having like just these really supportive conversations and real resources and just real moments with other homeschool parents in our club, right? That's what it's about. And that's where I met Kelly. We met on Clubhouse and then started doing stuff together in the club with Robin Robertson. So that's what we're doing here today. So we're just going to continue our awesome conversation. And for those of you guys that don't know, anyone watching, I grew up as an unschooler. That's not a story that I've shared a lot on the YouTube channel. I obviously share about it all the time on Clubhouse. But I grew up unschooled from birth to like 16 when I started college. And I went on to do a lot of school, but I'm also unschooling my son, who is almost 5. So I have both the perspective of growing up in the homeschool community, and now like the tables have turned and I have to figure out how to do it as a parent now, right? And reassess all those things, just like you do with everything about parenting.
You're so like, Mom, I loved you before, but now I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that was a lot. That was a lot of kids all the time in your life without a lot of breaks for her. And that's a really, so it's also like, that would be a whole conversation we could have someday about the thing of like, how do you keep the things that work from your childhood and also use that, like noticing, like a huge thing for my mom was her just being in it with us so much of the time. And for me, like that does not work. Like I can be in it, but I also need other things, like these interviews, like these conversations. Like I have to do more than that, or I'm not a very good mommy. I get to be angry mommy pretty quick.
Right. And that's important to know about yourself. Like, you know, we're all different.
It's true. Okay, so Kelly is the creator of the 90-minute school day. Her Instagram feed is definitely something to follow. She's always dropping awesome resources in there. She's also really fun. She's my friend, and she homeschools her sweet three sweet little babies who are not babies at all, actually.
They're my babies.
They're your babies. Exactly. I know my husband last night, we had some other little kids over that we've been taking care of, and he said to my son, "How's my baby?" And the other friends were like, "What? He's not. Who's your baby? He's not a baby." And my husband was like, "Well, he's my baby, baby, even though he's a kid now." So Kelly, tell me about you. Tell me about you as a homeschool mom and kind of where you're at in your homeschool life journey, like how you got here a little bit, because I think that's super helpful for people just to hear the stories from other moms over and over again, they need the stories, even if it feels like we've told them 12 billion
I
times.
know. I'm like, okay, let me start my spiel.
Yeah,
No, but
do it.
I agree with you on stories. Like that's how we learn. That's like the best way to learn is to talk to other people, to read stories, to kind of immerse yourself in stories, to watch stories. Whoever's watching us on YouTube right now. So a little bit about me. I'm a foster adoptive mom. So all three of my children have come to my husband and I through adoption in the foster care system. We live in West Virginia, and my first interaction with homeschooling started when I was about 10, and I met this girl in ballet class that wanted to be my friend, and I went to public school, and she was homeschooled. I'm sort of like, what is that? And I remember asking my mom, I want to be homeschooled. She stays home all day. My mom was like, nope, you're going to school.
So we don't do that.
Right. So anyways, she's my best friend. She's still my best friend to this day. And, that was my first exposure to homeschool. I never thought I would homeschool. I have a lot of respect for homeschoolers. It wasn't until my oldest daughter, who's 13 now, we were adopting her, and we wanted to have some extra time with her because we had only had her for about a year in foster care, and we were adopting her, but also because academically she was thriving in her first grade public school that she'd been living with us. However, there were some other needs that weren't being met in the classroom setting and in the school setting. In the school, like we tried to work with them, but they were like, she's great. And we're like, yeah, I know she is great, but there's some other things that we need to like help support her on. And what can you guys do? We decided to bring her home because that's what we realized she needed most is to kind of catch up in family life. And so we brought her home in second grade, and I had done all my homework because I was a straight A student in school, and I had like listened to podcasts, I had read articles and blogs and books, and we'd attended some local homeschooling resource, what are they called? Exhibit halls that are attached to a conference. And we did all that. And so I had like school set up for the first day of second grade. We started with the school system. It was great. We had fun for about a week playing school for about 6 hours a day. We started, and I didn't know any better. Like that's what she'd been doing. So she was okay with it. That was like first grade. That's all I knew being in public and private schools. And we had it all. We were doing Spanish. We were doing everything. And we had fun for a while. And then we started to needed some shifts. So we started to like immediately draw back on the time. But then I had trouble letting that go because I felt like we needed something to do during the day as well. And I know that other homeschooling parents are also like, often with me, I'm the creator of the 90-minute school day. They're like, well, what do you do the rest of the day?
Yeah.
And so
whatever we want.
I know. They're like, yeah, well, I don't want whatever you want. And so for us, we kind of floundered around a little bit with school at home, trying different things. I switched curriculums.
You also had other kids at home too. It wasn't just your daughter at the time, right?
Right. Yeah. I've actually never had
kids.
I've only had one child for like 2 weeks. Always had more than one. So yes, I had an infant at the time, who's my 7-year-old now. And so she and I were kind of working through this together. And long story short, a couple years in, we're constantly adapting, and it's not static. We just had a moment where I realized I don't need this curriculum. This curriculum, I had allowed it to be my master because they were the experts and they knew what they were doing, and I was not confident in my own abilities. And then kind of as the more we worked together, the more I was able to be like, oh, wait a second. I'm the expert. This is my kid, and we can do this. And I can kind of, it's almost like taking off the training wheels.
Oh, that is I just want people watching this and watching the replay just to hear that for a moment, because you're saying like you had let the curriculum become your master because you weren't confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is just so key. I hear that over and over again with parents, but they're not always able to articulate it like
Mm-hmm.
that. They're able to say like, oh, I have to do this because, and they have all this like laundry list of the reasons why they have to do it, but they're not they're not yet clear on the fact that it's just the work they have to do to own the full weight and responsibility of homeschooling your kids, and that's okay. That you can do it. You can do it. You're the, like you said, you're the one that knows your kid best. You won't screw it up. It's the most important, like parenting is the most important thing you've ever done and ever will do. You're going to do it good. You're gonna, so you're going to put in whatever.
No one cares more about their education than you.
Yeah. Like you're going to figure it out in relationship with one another. So I just wanted to highlight that for a minute. So you were saying, so slowly you felt like you could branch out.
Right. And, I started to explore new things. And what I didn't know at the time is I was going through the deschooling process, which is kind of like deconstructing traditional education. So we're all familiar with how society and the public school systems around the world kind of operate. What we're not familiar with is how children learn. And there's so much material out there to read and however you learn best about this, but it's still in the minority. And so I was kind of moving and shifting and not realizing I was deschooling. And we just started to pay more attention to what we enjoyed, what worked for us, what didn't work, where we were getting into conflict, removing that or coming at it in a different way. Because in life, you need to be a problem solver. And in my day job, that's what I do. I'm in corporate event planning, and that's just paid problem solving. Yep. And being able to get ahead of things. I wanted to be proactive instead of reactive, because often in parenting, we are reactive because something has just happened. And as the adult, we feel like we need to be in control. And so then we can spin off a chain reaction that later on we think, oh, I think I maybe could have done that better, which I still do. Yeah. So, so anyways, we kind of deschooled at the time, and out of that came the 90-minute school day. It was kind of this framework and a system I made for myself because I needed it. I needed kind of to have an objective for the day that was flexible enough that when things happened, interruptions, we had a bad day, we could flex. But we still had this kind of like rhythm. And then it can also be used retroactively. So we can just have a fun day. And then I can look back through this lens and see this happened. So much learning is happening. And so it's kind of a way to put like a rubric over your day with your family and be able to report into your local homeschooling board or be able to write your notes, or to give yourself something if you want to introduce a little bit more formal education, to give yourself a way to go that's not set in stone. So you can adapt if like your brilliant idea doesn't pan out the way you had it.
No one wants to do your craft that you set up for your learning project, or you actually forgot 4 key ingredients for the science experiment, and now everyone's sitting there looking at you.
Right. Because we overcomplicate it. Like we all know this, but we forget that we know this. We always, as humans, tend to overwork the problem because of fear and doubt, when if we would just relax a little bit and be more receptive to being open, it would come easier.
I like what you were saying about how the 90-minute school day is helpful for people to like backtrack their learning. Like you can to document, basically to document the things that they've learned, because in some states, in some areas, and everyone watching might not know this, but in some areas you have to kind of track what your children are doing and what their learning is in different ways, depending on where you are in the world. And so sometimes I think people think like, oh, something like the 90-minute school day or systems like that isn't really helpful for like unschoolers, for example.
Yeah.
But it is if you have to do some of that work, or if your kids are a little bit older and you want to start tracking what they're doing for like a college transcript or something like that. So you can really overlay that on top of what you guys are already doing. And for yourself as the parent, either be confident that they're learning in the areas you want to make sure they're learning in, or you can communicate to somebody else how they are in fact learning in those areas. If that's
because sometimes that's where you struggle. Like,
I know what they know, this,
but I need to communicate this to the person that's going to sign off on their learning for that year. And it's also like, young children play really easily. They have this beautiful way. And then if your child has entered a school system for kindergarten, first grade, they've kind of transitioned out of that. And you almost have to bring them back to this free play if they're in those early elementary years, or if they've been in there longer, it's almost like they need to like deprogram themselves from institutionalized learning to be able to learn at home. And you have to do that with them.
So let's say a little bit more about that, because I know that it comes up in our rooms a lot, like that on Clubhouse. So parents will come into these rooms and say, oh, I'm so inspired by John Holt. I'm so inspired by these unschooling concepts, or whoever their person is, right? And they're really excited to implement that. And then they try to tell their kids that they just pulled out of school after being in school from kindergarten to 4th grade. They bring them home and they say, okay, be free. And their kids are like, what do you mean be free? Like, you're supposed to tell me what to do. You're the grown up. This isn't my job. This is your job, right? Because they're so used to those roles that were doing their best to be successful with it, right? So I think that's really shocking to parents, because they expect all their kids want to do is be free. So they're shocked when their children
the kids
like,
think that's all they want too.
Exactly.
Like, freedom.
But then the kid comes in and they're like, I don't really know how to spend my time. So like, I don't know what to do, or I'm bored because you haven't told me what to do. So what are some of the ways, in your thoughts, that families can, with elementary school age kids, like let's just focus on that. What are some of the things they can do to just ease that transition a little bit and help teach their kids that they really can have autonomy over their time?
Yeah. So when I have clients that have come to me with this exact problem, the first thing I tell them to do is to do a time audit. So, when you have your child in school, or even if you don't, you often, especially here in America, we tend to overschedule our kids, and they are taught from a young age to take direction, and they don't have a lot of experience necessarily, especially in that elementary school age kind of group of kids, on managing their own time. And so they're lost. They want to be told what to do next. They want a list. They're very schooly minded. And so are we. And so we want to give them this list. And so it's almost like unraveling. We need to kind of start to give them a little bit of freedom, but we also need to give them a little bit of things to do that are more play minded and more to start in a flow. So you do the time audit to be able to understand how time has been working for your family. So you just kind of get it all out on a grid. And then you look at, okay, where can I spend some time out of my day now that we're redoing this, and sit with my child and be with my child to have that connection. So I start building into this connection, and it doesn't have to be long. Like, it can be like 5-10 minute segments to kind of get them going. You and I talk about this a lot in our Clubhouse room. Like, you will sit with your son and start an activity with him, and then he gets kind of immersed, and you can leave and he can stay, and he's in a play flow.
Yeah.
So it's almost like helping them to transition to these this new concept of self-direction, where they can do it. And another thing that I recommend, and outside of the time audit, is like, organize your home with your kid. So if you've got crafts, sit down with them. And this is learning, because it's sorting and matching. And you can reorganize the craft table and then talk to your child about anytime you want to do a craft, and you can put some boundaries around it. You need to first let me know that you're doing the craft and make sure it's okay and it's the right time. We're not about to run out the door before you get into the glue, but just talk to me about it. And then I want you to be able to do it. And we do all of our crafting in this area. And when you're done, I want it to all be put back. So make sure that you don't take out more than you're willing to put back, something like that. And you do it.
And then you have to teach them that, right? And then when they're like, there's so much out, then you're like, well, I'll help you put it away and help you. Maybe we should, it doesn't look like you used this. Maybe you can not get it out next time till you need it, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
still got to coach it.
Yeah. And then depending on your kid, like some kids are just naturally more organized and they don't need as much help in that area. And then some kids, it's like, let's talk about what you want to do. And then let's only get out what you need right now. And then if you need more later, like put back what you're not using and kind of work through. And that's just learning systems and good habits. So
yeah, I love that tip. And particularly too, like I've noticed sometimes when kids are coming in from having been in school, when they're coming into homeschooling, they're just so used to getting detailed directions that if you don't specifically say, like, your job is going to be to pick up everything when you're done with it, they're not going to think to do that necessarily, right? And so I think that can be a real like rubbing point for parents, because they think their kids should know how to do things because they thought maybe that's how things were done in school. But if you weren't sitting in the classroom and knowing all the rules at school and knowing, like, you don't know what they were taught to do and what they weren't taught to do around their schoolwork and their time. And so I think that even with my son, sometimes I notice like I'm having all these expectations of things I think he should understand about like how to be in the world. And I'm like, did you ever teach him that? Have you ever asked him to please do it that way? Or that this is important every time, not just that one time I asked you to do it, and why it's important. Like they require sometimes a lot of more direction than we want them to have. We make assumptions about their understanding about why things are important.
All the time.
And with homeschooling, I think you really notice that whenever you're in transition as a family, right? And if you're transitioning to homeschooling, you're going to notice that.
Yeah. Sure. And so kind of like we de-school throughout our lives. Like it's just, especially if you've been through the whole system, like I have, you're constantly catching yourself getting kind of schooly minded. Like, oh my gosh, do we know about this? No, we don't, and kind of like, okay, it's okay. They don't need to know that today. We can just put that on the list and we can kind of introduce that topic and see if they're interested right now. But yeah, absolutely. I think so much about this is just communication and mutual respect. Like as the adult, we're responsible for their safety and their well-being and being kind of like the scaffolding. If you think of co-regulation with an infant, if your baby's crying, you hold that baby and you're their external skin. You hear all this great language around infants, but not necessarily around a 6-year-old. And so when a 6-year-old is in a new environment or things have been disrupted from their regular routine, they are dependent on you as the adult to kind of reroute them in their new reality. And so it's that time. And I think a lot of parents are like, yeah, we want to do this deschooling. It sounds great, but we need to get to math.
like right now. That's why I pulled them out, because they weren't making progress in math, and that's why we're doing it. Yeah.
Right. And so which curriculum do I need to buy for math, and which curriculum do I need to buy for language arts? And those are valid questions, but right now you just needed to kind of develop a system in your home and kind of some natural rhythms to anchor that kid. And then you're going to be so much more successful when you kind of are introducing these other concepts.
So that's really hard for people, right? I mean, that's got to be really hard. Like, you take your kids out of school, you have all these things that you're suddenly feeling the weight, like the full weight of the fact that you're responsible to educate these little people. And for people with the schooling background and schooling mindset, that's big. That's big weight. Right?
Yeah.
So what are some tips that parents can actually just put on the brakes, like really allow themselves to follow the advice to de-school, to follow the advice to say, you know what, you guys don't have to do schoolwork for a month, and your kids will be fine. Like, you could take a whole month off of school in the school year and your kids are fine. Like, is it just them hearing the stories over and over again and building safety with that concept, or are there things that they can do to help them walk that?
Yeah. And the parents need that. Like, you're institutional, school minded, you want to do this thing, but you need some steps because you've never done this. And if you don't kind of work at deschooling, your natural thing is going to be to do what I did. You're going to set up school at home and you're going to kind of learn it the hard way. That's certainly a great way to learn. Failure is a great teacher. But you can also like give yourself the support and resources that are more available now that this is more of it's not mainstream yet, but it's more of a common term in homeschooling circles. And so, the first thing with that time audit, if your children were in school, then just the rigmarole of getting them out the door in the morning and on the bus. Now you don't have to do that. That's so much time right there. It's like an hour and a half, probably. That's the whole 90-minute school day. And then, if you think about however your child got home, if it was on a bus or if you picked them up and waited in line, picked them up, or you pick them up off the school bus, and then you probably had some activities to take them to. So in the deschooling process, for my clients, I recommend, hey, those things, that all that ballet, all of this, rethink of it. You don't have to let it go, but like unload off of the family calendar for the upcoming couple of weeks at least. Just unload your calendar. You've made these obligations, but you don't have to do them. You can pull back and give yourself that time, because one of the greatest stressors in family life is getting your kids out the door, and just remove it.
Where are the shoes?
Yeah. Where are the shoes? Why don't you have your coat on? I've told you 5 times. Go potty. Wait. Oh no. Why are you playing? Come back here.
Because you took too long getting them out the door. They had to go play.
Yeah. Then you're frustrated. You're like, I can't get anywhere on time, I obviously have experience with this.
Yeah. That seems like that's happened to you before.
A few times.
Oh, this is so good. I think that it's this concept of deschooling. I mean, I feel like it's something that was talked about even when I was a kid, but it was very fringy, and it was only for the people that were like going to be radical.
Yeah.
It wasn't for everybody. It was for people that were going to like throw the textbooks out of the window. If people attended to do school at home, then it was okay to still do that. But I still remember, even when I was a little kid, knowing families that would start homeschooling after their kids had been in school, and them having the battles, like the parents battling the kids about the sitting at the table. And I remember my mom being like, they just need to set it aside for a while and come back to it. They need to all stop thinking that it has to be like school, just all of this. Those concepts were there because, there was nothing different basically about pulling your kids home, except there were less resources out there.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I love about the 90-minute school day and the other, and other people just out there sharing resources in the way that you can share resources now. When I was a kid, you had to go to the library and photocopy things, or you had to buy super expensive curriculum. Like, those were the 2 options. Like, there was no internet. You couldn't even Google things. There was no Google.
Yeah. And that's actually, I think, almost like a problem. Like there's so much out there that you get overwhelmed. It's like drinking out of the fire hose, because there's like all of this homeschooling material, all of these homeschooling voices. And it's like, well, somebody just tell me what to do, because I don't even know where to start. And
that is so good, Kelly, because I do find that. And in the Clubhouse rooms too, like, I'm always surprised, like, people being like, well, I don't know if we're unschoolers or homeschoolers. And it's like, why does that matter? Like, just do your life. But
well, know me, I'm like, I think I'm still a homeschooler if we got to nail me down on something, but I'm very unschoolery.
Yeah, exactly. But that's because you have, again, back to the confidence, right? Like, you have the confidence because of experience, because of hearing story after story, because of failing a million times and succeeding a million times, right? Like, because of all of that, you have the confidence to do what works for your family. And I think that's the thing, when people are in that drinking out of the fire hose mode, they like just take that step back and say, how do we want to feel in our family? And what do I feel like, based on knowing my family, will get us there?
Right there.
One foot at a time.
That's so good. Just like, what do I want? Why are we doing this? Why did we leave school? Are we leaving school just for now? And you don't have to decide, like, am I a lifer or not? But spending that time in self-reflection, I think, is so important. Every family needs to do that. And then, so often throwing money at things solves problems, but so often we throw money at things and we just light it on fire. And so, if nothing else, take your kids out of school, enjoy just being your kids, just enjoy them, work on stuff around the house. And then you can kind of like spend some money, but don't just
by like buying curriculums and programs and stuff. Yeah, that is a hard thing for me to resist, not with homeschool stuff, but just with other things in my life. When I get started on something and then there isn't an obvious next step, then I want to be like, well, I better buy some stuff to get ready for this. What does Amazon think I need for this, right? And Amazon then I have to stop myself. Like, I just have to like pull back and be like, whoa, like, this is your anxiety or your excitement about something. There's actually nothing that needs to be done in this moment other than sitting and being. Like, that's it. So stop thinking that you can like do your way out of this feeling of being uncomfortable. Because new homeschoolers, they're going to be a little bit uncomfortable or a lot uncomfortable a lot of the time, because for most people, it's well out of their comfort zone, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you have to get used to that.
And that's
like,
okay.
Oh, I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. And then you're teaching your child to do hard things. Like, and you can admit to your child, like, we're doing this thing and we're doing the best we can. And we have the right to change our mind, and that's one thing, parents come to me and they're like, I think I want to homeschool, but I'm just not sure, but it's on my heart. I get that a lot. It's on my heart. I know this is the right thing. I just don't think I can do it. I'm not qualified. And it's like, then do it. Just jump. And you can always re-enroll them back in school. But try this out, and try this out with some support. Like, don't just like jump without the life raft, but, get a coach, just read a book, follow some blogs, listen to some podcasts, watch YouTube, and then, go from there. Find someone locally.
Find people. I think that's a big thing. And like, whenever I am learning something new, I want, or embarking on something new in my life, I want all the stories from all the people. And when so like, I also adopted my son, for people watching. Kelly knows that, other people don't know that. But I remember when we were first wanting to do open adoption of an infant, like, I wanted all the stories. And there just aren't that many stories. I mean, I was like deep down in the Amazon pages trying to buy books on this. I mean, really, 5 pages in on the search results, trying to find stories of open adoptive families, and YouTube and all of that, because you're just so hungry for, how does it actually work?
And you want the real stories. You don't just like, this is amazing.
Look at
all butterflies and rainbows.
Yeah. And you want details, like really specific details. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit of like, what would an average day, and I know there's no average day in your life, but what would a day look like when you guys are practicing the 90-minute school day at home? Because you have kids that are 3 very different ages, right? And so what does that look like in the nitty gritty? Like, what's your schedule like? What's your time like? How many times do you have to put their shoes on to get them out the door and scream at them?
Yeah. Okay. So this is great. One thing I'll say is we are constantly shifting as a family, just like everyone else. So our routine this year looks different than last year. The 90-minute school day adapts. It's like a recipe. So if I make chicken and rice, I'm going to make it differently than you. You're going to make it differently than the lady down the street. But what it does is it gives you a framework and a system. So in our home, I just naturally think of my day in like 5 quadrants. Like, there's morning time where I wake up, and then I don't expect to do anything formal learning wise with my children until about 10 a.m. So in the morning, I get up and I kind of have my quiet time on the couch. The kids kind of get up, and my kids don't come downstairs till 8 o'clock, except the 3-year-old, because she can do what she wants. That's how she rolls. But the other kids, they have snacks.
She has no master.
That child is going to set the world on fire. So, but she used to stay upstairs with her sisters, but we've noticed lately, like, it's just easier for her to come downstairs, and she'll cuddle with me on the couch. But the older girls have snacks upstairs. So it's just kind of like giving myself space in the morning and my husband space in the morning for us to get engaged. And we had some form of this even when we had babies in the house, and we would just work with each other. So the important thing is for us to connect first thing. And that's what I've built the 90-minute school day to work. It's all about connection. You need to connect with your child. If you're having friction, you stop. You stop all schooling until you're back in connection. You just don't do that. It's not helpful. You can't actually learn because you're in your brainstem instead of your frontal lobe. So we do that. And then they have their snacks, and then we get dressed and we try to make our beds, and we get out the door. And I call it our morning movement, and we get outside. And so kids need to move. I need to move. We get some movement out of the way, and it kind of opens you up. You've woken up, you open up, and then we go into the 90-minute school day. And so just to kind of like sketch that out for me, we do our 90 minutes somewhere between 10 and 12:30 most days. We get it accomplished, and it's not back to back to back to back. That's what works best for me. I have clients that pick and choose throughout the day. Some people do it at night. it doesn't matter. It's meant to be broken
And it
up.
also doesn't have to be 90 minutes if it doesn't work for your family,
No,
right?
if
It's
you've
just the
got little,
framework. Yeah.
yeah, if you've got little kids, if your kids are under second grade, it should be like the 30-minute school day. So this is just really to be that framework and system. And then in the afternoon after lunch, we do quiet time. That's the time where I'll work or I'll have some rest time and the children are quiet somewhere else in the house. And so that's looked differently throughout the years, but that's been a consistent part of our rhythm. And then it's just open, free for all play until dinner time. And then it's bedtime. So that's kind of our rhythm. I know it's helpful for me to hear how other families do it. That doesn't mean it's the right way, but that's what works for us. And it's been something along that line. And so then the 90 minutes is, do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the 90 minutes is broken up into like 6 buckets. I call them pathways because again, it's kind of like the neuroscience behind it. But if you just want to think about it as 6 buckets and they're broken into 2 groups. So there's like red buckets and blue buckets, let's say. And so the red buckets are easy to remember because they're your reading, writing, arithmetic. They're the 3 R's, right? That everyone thinks about that aren't actually R's.
I was going to say that's confused me so much when I was a kid. I was like, what do they mean the 3 R's? What do they mean? That doesn't make any sense.
That like homophones and homonyms and I don't know which one's which. We have to Google. But anyways, yeah. So it's like reading, writing, arithmetic is your skill work. And that those red buckets, we all recognize, regardless of how you approach learning, that human beings are better equipped to teach themselves if they know how to read, if they know how to write, and if they understand arithmetic. Now, how we do that varies greatly, but those things we can all agree on. And then the other 3 areas in the blue buckets are content. And so that's just knowledge acquisition. You know, when you think about geography, it doesn't matter how geeky your 4-year-old is on geography. They may know more than a 12-year-old, but they're not going to have the ability to understand everything that goes in with geography. It's not just finding a place on a map. There's so much else that goes into it. Because it's knowledge acquisition, there's culture, there's, you know, societies, all this stuff that goes into history, and it's all interconnected, which we've totally like bastardized by putting into the public education system.
Let's just memorize our capitals.
Yeah, into linear subjects and like this is geography, and you know, it's all interrelated. So it's content. And so that content acquisition is connection time that you're spending with all of your children. You don't have to sit with the 2nd grader a certain period and run through all their subjects. You don't need to sit with your 6th grader and run through all their subjects. You sit with everyone and you do morning time. And that's just connection time where you convey your family's values. And I have a printable on my website that you can download for free. And it breaks that down more. And then you have read aloud. Just read aloud to your kids. It doesn't matter if they're 18 or 8 months. Read aloud to your kids for 20 minutes a day or, you know, 10. And then the third one is your activities. And so this can be like, we're kind of a crafty family. So we like to do activities as crafts a lot, but we're also an outdoor family. So there's a lot of hikes and there's a lot of like exploration outside, things that we like to do together. And for me, I just tell myself, oh, I can do anything with my kids for 20 minutes. And it might lend itself to more, but for that parent that works, it's like, okay, yeah, I can do 20 minutes of Play-Doh with my kids and we can create some great thing. And it's that connection time. And often in those activities, that's where the natural learning comes. And you start to see what your kid's interested in because you might ask them. Or if you want to be more formal, like less unschooly, and you want to be more formal, you can say like, my daughter really is into Egypt right now. And like yesterday, she was reading a book and she was like, I want to do this stylus. They were talking about taking a read and making your own stylus. And I was like, great, let's get that on the calendar. We can do that. We did it last year, but she doesn't remember. So we'll do it again. And that would be and that would be an activity based on her interest that came out of like a formal study that she asked for. So there's all kinds of ways to do this depending on where your comfort zone is. But that's kind of how you would break up the 90-minute school day. Did I explain that well? Is that clear?
Yeah, I think you did. I mean, because I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it just from having been in relationship with you for a year or so. Like, I feel like it's so flexible. I think that's something like when you hear something like 90-minute school day, you think maybe it's going to be like really focused and really like rigid. Timers. Yeah, get your timer out. We're going to do 15 minutes and we're going to do, you know, this many subjects, 9 subjects, 15 minutes, you know. And I think that's what I think is beautiful about it is you demonstrated that it's flexible. It's what works for your family. It's the concepts of hitting the major subjects that you want to make sure your kids have. And I think that's really cool. And I mean, I don't know if you said your kids are 3, 7, and 13, right?
13. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is wide, and the thought that you can sit down at the table and do work with your kids that is helpful for someone that's 3 years old and someone that's 13, I think is really important for homeschoolers to hear that can happen. And, your 3-year-old, there'll be things in it that they take at their level, and the 13-year-old will be able to take it at their level,
Yeah. And the other lady takes it at her level.
Yeah, because you're learning too.
I'm learning with them. And like, I'll be fascinated by something that they're studying. Like, I was talking to my daughter, she got real interested in World War II this week. That's not part of her learning goals that she mapped out for herself, because she is an unschooler. Like, that's what she's doing. And that's kind of another way to look at the 90-minute school day. Is it's almost like sometimes you need, like we talked about earlier, we need to put some kind of framework around our kids because they might need it. But at some point they become confident in themselves, and it might look, maybe they're a confident 4-year-old and they're already self-directing their learner. And maybe you have someone who's a little bit more timid or just a little bit more structured, and they want a program. That's fine. But then when you're a teenager, you should be pursuing your interests to prepare you for adulthood. So she got off on this like World War II kick because we're helping a friend of ours write her memoirs, and she grew up in Nazi Germany. And so my daughter started realizing, like, I don't have the knowledge to be able to appreciate what she's saying. I'm going to go acquire that so I can track along better. And so she was having all these discussions with me this week. And then I was like, I think I might need to do a little bit of refresher with my own reading, just because and we talk about this in our home, and I'm sure most people do, but you need to approach history from all angles, and you need to hear all the voices, because this person has this perspective, and we want to know what someone else who doesn't have that perspective, what's their version?
Yeah. And we know that there's major gaps in mainstream curriculum on history and social studies and all that. We know that, right? So you have to take it upon yourself to say, like, how can I make sure that this is balanced and that I'm not just teaching my child to memorize facts that are only true for certain people, or we're the only experience of certain people.
That's where homeschooling really offers a world-class education, because as you're teaching your child, you're able to like tell them this and teach them this, so they don't just like accept what the authority figure tells them is true. They actually can do some critical thinking and be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but I'm curious about this, doesn't add up. What about this? Ask those questions.
Yeah. Like I always think it's interesting. I studied a lot of like feminist studies when I was younger and in college. And it was so interesting for me to have this, we have these thoughts of like, oh, there was the revolution where women went back to work in the 70s. And it's like, wait, you mean wealthy women went back to work? Women who, didn't have to work before? Because like, 2/3 of women in the US always worked outside the home. And so, so it's like, I think that's just like such a good perspective. Like we teach like, oh, and all the women left the home and went back. It's like, really all of them, or the ones who didn't have to work before, So it's such a different shift to think about things through all the different lenses. And we can't ever, because we only have our lens, so we don't.
No one can ever know anything.
And we can't even see all the lenses out there sometimes. But the more that we're aware of that, the more we're gonna be able to expose our kids to more.
And that's one thing I like about community, especially our community on Clubhouse, is because I kind of think of it like The Voice, that TV program, The Voice, where you don't see the person, you just hear them.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it, is like you hear the person talking, and all you have is a picture. And the people who show up in these rooms come to these rooms because the topic alerted something inside of them that they're curious about. So there's all these learners that jump into a room, and they might jump back out. But if they stay because either they're agreeing, or they're really being challenged, or they're really getting a lot of value, or all in and of itself. And I've left so many rooms that you and I have hosted that I'm like, whoa, I I didn't ever think of it that way, you know, and that's amazing. And I'm going to go like down a rabbit hole of my own research because now I'm curious about whatever it was, you know?
Yeah, and our Clubhouse rooms do end up having a lot of like racial and ethnic diversity and
Yes.
geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity. And I'm always really impressed by that and surprised by that because, you know, that's not always the case in your homeschool neighborhood, right? You're in person. You're oftentimes around people that are kind of like you because they have kind of the same interests as you. And so I love the Clubhouse piece because there's way more diversity on Clubhouse than I have in my day-to-day, like real life environment, in-person environment, I should say.
Yeah. And just geographically, like I live in West Virginia, you're up in the Pacific Northwest.
I'm in Washington. Yeah. We're pretty, we wouldn't have met at the park, Kelly.
Yeah. And we're good buddies.
I know. It's a cool thing. I know I tell people that all the time that it's like, oh, I have friends like all over the country and some of them I've never met in person. And that is okay. It's such a different world to be living in, to be able to have that. And we don't have to be like write long form pen pal letters to do it.
Right. And it's okay to like meet strangers on the internet one day. You know, love to meet you in person. You know, tell my mom,
yeah,
meeting
they're
a
not
friend
all
that
scary.
I met on the internet. You know, remember like when we were growing up, like don't ever do that.
From their chat room, from your 90s chat room.
We just dated ourselves.
That's true. I do every time I get in a Clubhouse room because I like to tell people how long ago I was homeschooled and unschooled because I feel like it's just a really important disclaimer. Like it was not the way it is now. There was no Googling your question. There was no printables online to teach your kids things. We had library cards and a bus pass most of the time because my dad oftentimes took the car to work. So we had a bus pass and a library card and, you know, peanut butter and jam sandwiches in a backpack. That was it. That's all we did.
Yeah, I love hearing your stories. And I think so many homeschoolers enjoy hearing like, whoa, you were like educated really radically, especially in the time and place when you were educated. And here you are to say, guys, this works. This whole thing works. And I can tell you, like, I love your story about how you were like, yeah, I did like regular, you know, like lifestyle type of math until I actually needed to, you know, increase my math skills so that I could get admitted to the local college, right?
Yep. Yeah, I didn't study math formally when I was a kid at all. I never wanted to sit down and do the workbooks. Talk about throwing money at a problem. I do think my parents bought a lot of things over the years to try to like inspire me to do math, all these different manipulatives and programs that were hands-on. And
you're like sniffing it out. You're like, this smells like
no, this smells like math. This smells like math. If it didn't involve me like tripling the recipe for cookies or scones or something, I wasn't really interested in the math involved. If I could triple food recipes, quadruple a brownie recipe,
matter to you, right?
That was fine. Yeah, exactly. It had to be applicable to my real life. And I feel like you hear that story over and over again. And even like my husband, who was super traditionally schooled, he went to public school from kindergarten to 12th grade. He had so many things that he didn't really like learn properly until he was a grown-up and was interested in them. You know, like he was interested in something. And so he chose to master that, you know, and I just had the freedom to do that from a very young age and not get the hangups about, I think oftentimes when kids aren't interested in something, they develop the thought that they're bad at something.
Yes.
And I could very easily see that if I had been in school, I would have thought, oh, I'm bad at math. But I never was bad at math. I could not care less. I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like physically painful to think about doing math. There was just so much else in the world that was more interesting to me.
But when you got motivated, you knocked it out.
Yeah, because it wasn't hard. It's not like it's hard. And
it's true. It's like you go back and like math concepts that I was struggling with in like 7th grade, I look back at and I'm like, man, my fully formed brain and my life experiences now, I already know this. I don't even need a notebook or a workbook or a textbook to teach it to me because it's like life teaches it to you. And that's if workbooks are working for your kid, great, that's awesome. But if workbooks aren't working for your kid, there's other ways to get that material and get that exposure. And it doesn't have to be right now. It might be in a couple years. And this whole label thing, like you're going to look at me on my soapbox. Stop.
I love your soapboxes.
the labels, because my children have like, I can see people wanting to put labels on them, and then they've gotten diagnoses and things like that. And labels are helpful for diagnostics. It's good to know what's going on, but then we don't need to like wrap them up in this, like, you're less than, because oftentimes that label is their superpower. I posted on Instagram kind of like a reel this week on Jerry Pinkney. I always want to say Pinky, but it's Pinkney. And he's an illustrator. He was dyslexic. And but he loved reading. And so his life was dedicated to writing and illustrating books as someone who is dyslexic, because they didn't have the label when he was growing up. And he was able to spend his time with stories, but his calling and purpose was to be an illustrator. And it's just amazing. It's just like, don't pigeonhole your kids. They're here for a reason. They're going to do something amazing. And we need to just be their amen corner and like coach them.
I love that so much. That is so good. And yeah, you do see that all the time. Like if you look at the inverse of whatever's going on with your kid, like, oh, they have this issue here. Even my little boy, like he's very passionate, I think is a good word to say it. He has big emotions. He's very passionate, but those big feelings that he has all the time, like the inverse of that is that he's like, can be incredibly thoughtful and considerate.
He's empathetic.
Because he has such deep feeling, right? And so other people might look at that and be like, oh my gosh, that poor kid, he struggles with like outbursts and tantrums still at that age. But it's like, yeah, he does, but he will master that. And the inverse of that is so helpful in life, to be able to care that much.
Yeah, he's going to have so much deep reserves of compassion because he has experienced those deep emotions that someone else who maybe repressed their emotions or what their circumstances didn't enable them to feel their emotions can go and just be friends with your son and feel understood and able to like let it out. Right. Yeah. And so really we all have this duality. Like we have this gift and we can use it for good, or we can have people tell us it's that whole like growth mindset versus what is it? Growth mindset versus, I want to say stagnant, but it's not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. Or like abundance mindset and scarcity mindset. It's that whole concept of like, it's really about what we think about things. It's our perspective. And if we can shift our perspective and stop looking at our child as someone who has some sort of disability and say, my child's gifted. And it's funny because even in the public school systems, I had my daughter evaluated when she was in public school. She had an IEP, and the gifted and special ed programs is the same program, right?
Anyone that requires anything that could benefit from anything unique, then they're in that program, right? If they're
I'm like, it's because they're all
the norms.
Yeah, they're all individuals. There's a bell curve because they're lumping everybody together and trying to make them the same.
So what you were saying too about like math concepts, like that you struggled with in 7th grade and then like being super easy for you when you were older because of experience. I experienced that with understanding grammar, because the same thing, just like I wouldn't study math, I wouldn't study grammar because it's like, how boring is grammar, right? That's crazy. But when I needed to, at least to me, that's super crazy. I don't care about organizing grammar.
You're the same part of your brain too.
Yeah, but it was like so easy because I was a reader and I had all this life experience up to about 15 years old of being an avid reader, that all I had to do was see all of my life experience on one side and map it to this map on the side of what grammar was. And I was like, oh, well, that's easy. I know what that is. I know what this is. It was like, I could just map it. But if you had sat me down at 7 years old and been like, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is where a comma goes, and these are the rules why, I knew where commas went because I knew how to read and write, it's like, and then I just had to learn the rule to write it on a test. So it's so easy to map things at that point because of life experience.
Yeah, grammar should only be taught like you just said, once in high school-ish age, or you can learn it as an adult. And they've done studies on this, and it's kind of this archaic way to like pummel kids with grammar because it actually kills their love of learning when it's just like speaking, and they have study after study. And we all know this, this is very mainstream. If a child grows up being read to and having adults that's like are native speakers to that language, that child enters the school system with a good vocabulary. They pick up reading easily because they understand the language. Now, if a child has been raised with like a different mother tongue, and then they immigrate to a different country, they're going to be a little bit behind because now they're getting bilingual, but they're going to catch up. And so it's the same concept of like, if you like no one teaches babies like, we all do it, mama, dad, but like really they're sequencing all this language. And then one day it's just done. Like we didn't actually teach them how to speak.
Yeah, we didn't do it.
We just
they
spoke
just
to them.
lived. Yeah.
Yeah. And talked to them and they figured it out. And the same thing with reading. Yeah. That's such a huge one that you just like set people free. Cause I remember like being really concerned about that as a young homeschooling mom. And yeah, grammar, my 13-year-old is a beautiful writer and we let go of the grammar classes like in 3rd grade.
Yeah.
And she's in 8th grade now. She's a fantastic writer because she's a reader.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always been a skill of mine in the workplace as well, that I'm just like a very good writer. And with editing, like I'm an excellent editor. But I still probably couldn't tell you like the reason why with all the rules. I don't know. I still don't know a lot of things that you drill. Like, I just don't know them. Like, I don't know capitals. I don't know multiplication tables. It's just not relevant to my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't need it. Like, I guess if you wanted to be an editor at a newspaper or you wanted to be an editor at a publishing house, but then you would,
I still don't need to know the rules. I just edit them properly. It's not the way it is, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, we could talk all day, Kelly, because we have to stop ourselves multiple times a week from talking all day. So we've almost been talking for a whole hour, and I would love to know more about this summit. When I was talking last week with Robin Robertson, she talked quite a bit about this, how to be an awesome homeschooler summit on Clubhouse. We had done one in August, and there's going to be another one on March 18th. And you are one of the epic hosts of this summit. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it and how people can sign up for it? It's free, right? Totally free.
Yeah. It's free. So everything we've been talking about, we want to supply homeschoolers, whether you've been homeschooling this year for 5, 7, 10 years, or you're thinking about it. We want you to come. It's on March 18th. It's howtobeanawesomehomeschooler.com. You just sign up there. We have our speakers that are speaking to our themes of reclaim, resist, and resilience. And so it's the 3 R's of homeschooling, and it's reclaim, resist, resilience. And we're just going to speak around those topics because this is for parents. This is continuing education and community. And we want to grow the community. We want to empower parents with confidence, and we want them to learn from those who have gone ahead of them. So our speakers are going to be Ainsley Arment with Wild and Free. She's going to be kicking us off with Reclaim. And then Robin Robertson of Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids.
Who's watching live right now? Hello, Robin. I see you. We also have the
Robin.
Beach Lady watching live. Hi. Thank you for being here.
So she and I are going to be speaking to reclaiming the teen years. And that's kind of this part of the summit that's going to speak to reclaiming. And there's so many things you can reclaim in homeschooling. And I'm sure we'll talk about all of that in those 2 summits. But then also we are going to have Karen Ricks of our kitchen classroom, and she's going to be speaking to resist along with Karima Akila from the Genius School. Both of those ladies are fantastic and fun, and we're really going to be empowered with the reasons that homeschooling brings a reason to resist. And it might not be what you think it is. So that's going to be fantastic. And then we're going to end our summit with resilience. And that is something that all humans need. And we definitely want to impart that to our children. And we need that for ourselves. And so we're going to have Leah McDermott with Your Natural Learner. She's going to be closing out with a keynote. And then she and Robin are going to do a live podcast wrapping up the 3 R's of homeschooling. So that's the summit. For fun.
I didn't realize it was a live podcast. That's going to be really fun.
Yeah, it is. We get to experience it together. And there's going to be Q&A. So it's involved. Like, people will be able to raise their hand and ask their questions. Each speaker is going to leave time for that. So it'll be a really great day of learning.
And you and Robin just did an episode of her podcast, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, about the summit. So if people want to learn more about it, they can go to that also at the imhomeschooling.com, I think is
Yes.
our website, right? Okay.
Mhm.
All right, that sounds great. So, and then to register for the summit, they go to, where do they go to register for that?
howtobeanAwesomehomeschooler.com.
All right, good. All right, well, anybody watching, make sure to leave comments and questions if you have things. I'll go through and answer any questions that are for me, and I'll let Kelly know if things pop up as well, and see if she has time to answer for you guys. And follow Kelly on Instagram for sure. That's the 90-minute school day, right?
Mhm.
And she always has great content. And Kelly and I do a room almost every Monday on Clubhouse, and you can go to any of our profiles and find links to that. And what else do we need to talk about? There's other rooms on Clubhouse as well in the Honey I'm Homeschooling Club. And
Yeah.
I'll be back next week with Sue Patterson from
Fun.
Unschooling Mom to Mom. So we'll do that next week as well. So that's all I've got. Anything else, Kelly?
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. I think that this is fantastic for everybody to come together and have this space on this platform. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here in my second interview, and we'll just see how these goes. I'm having so much fun with them so far, so I think I'll probably do a lot. All right. Thanks for being here.
Okay, bye.